Hello and welcome to Kirsty Knits and Sews YouTube channel. My name is Kirsty and this is my channel where I talk about all things knitting and occasionally sewing and other crafty things. Today I am going to teach you how to make a project bag. Now this is a sewing project, but it is a sewing project for knitting. So this is the kind of bag that I use when I knit, and most of the ones I use I have made. I think all of the ones I use I have made. And so I'm going to teach you how to make this size. Now, not planned, but here's a pre-caked skein of yarn. I can put that in nice and easily, and you can see fits in the bottom beautifully and has room for notions, things, and whatever project you knit can go on top. Now this is a finished size of 7.5 inches deep, 5 inches across at the bottom, and 8 inches across at the top. And the difference between bottom and top is because we have a boxed bottom. So there you go, that fits one skein beautifully. You can absolutely do this in a different size, but I'm only providing measurements for this size today. Now, if you like this particular bag, or you just need a new project bag, I will be giving this away on my next podcast episode. So keep an eye out for that. To make this bag, you will need 2 fat quarters or yardage equivalent and a 12-inch zip. So to make the bag that we're making today, you will need 2 front and back pieces. Now they don't have to be the same. I've decided to do mine the same today. And they can be as simple or as complex as you want. I just have one piece of fabric cut out. It's a floral. I didn't need it to be any more fussy. But you can scrap piece something together. You can put 2 and 2 together. Previously I have done like this, where I've done kind of the bottom part different and then the top part to give kind of a 2-tone bag. You have flexibility, but basically it just needs to end up at the right size, which for today's bag is 9 by 10 inches. You need 2 pieces for the lining. You need 2 pieces of interfacing. Now what I'm using is an iron-on felt because that's what I had available. Previously I've used leftover batting scraps from quilts, and I've used iron-on batting, I've used different types of pellons. It doesn't have to be fluffy, I just like the feel of the fluffy ones. You could use just a sew-in or an iron-on interfacing that doesn't have any poof to it. If you are not using iron-on, I do recommend sewing it to this. So if you're doing a scrappy front piece and using scrap batting, just sew this and this. You don't need a back one like you would a 2-piece quilt. So you could just do some sewing on here and that, you know, straight lines, quilting, whatever, just to keep the pieces together. But if you're doing iron-on, I don't worry with that, so we won't be doing that today. Other things you will need are 2, these are 2.5 by 4.5 inches. They are to bind to the inside of the bag once we're done, or when we're almost done. This is 2.5 by 13.5, 2.5 by 13, and that is for the strap of the bag. Now that one you can have wider or thinner. To do this, we will end up having 1/4 of the width. So the strap will actually be about that wide. If you want it wider or thinner, you can. I don't usually go thinner than this, but I have done from a 3-inch or a 4-inch strip before. But this, I decided to do 2.5 because this and this were just one strip of 2.5-inch fabric. And I know if you're a quilter, you likely have some 2.5-inch scraps somewhere in your stash. And then a 12-inch zip. iron everything before you start. I didn't iron my 2.5 inch piece, and you can see a bump here, but I know that will get ironed before I sew it. But these pieces, I ironed them. If you don't iron them before you cut them, it can make things a little fussy. But if you are doing your bag bigger, you want to make sure that your main fabric, your lining fabric, and your interfacing are all the same size. And I would not worry about cutting these down to 4.5 inches. I would just leave it as a long strip that's 10, 11, 12 inches long, and then cut it later on when you're ready to go. This, your handle, should not have to change size, except for if you want it a significantly bigger bag, you might want a thicker handle, but it doesn't need to change. And your zip will need to fit across the top of your bag. So this zip is actually a 12-inch zip, and I could have done a 12-inch wide bag. I've only used a 9-inch wide bag because I find it easier to sew this way. But if I was doing a 10-inch, 11-inch, or even a 12-inch wide bag, this zip would work for it. If I was going above a 12-inch wide top, I'd have to upsize my zip as well. I'm not going into what sizes to do, but if you're looking for a bigger bag and you want to jump in and do it, these are the things you'll have to upsize to do it. I thought I would show you just a few different options of how you can modify. The first one is this. Now, for this one, instead of doing just one main colour on the front, I split it into two. Now, the bottom piece was just this long, and the top one was this long. I tend to do about 2/3, 1/3, but the bigger the bag gets, the more of the main fabric I put on. The other thing to think about, like this is a much smaller bottom than I would normally do, and that's because I didn't have enough of this fabric. So it's very customizable. If you're short on one fabric, just make the other one a little longer, so long as you end up with the right dimensions for what you're wanting to do. If you want to make it a little wider, that is an option too. This is a great size for 2 skeins of yarn, so if you're doing 2 at a time socks or contrasting heel toes and cuffs, this is my go-to, or scrappy socks as well. But last night I whipped up these bags. 1, 2, pow pow. Really big. Now this is my go-to size for a sweater bag. It is a decently large sweater bag. Right now I have things in this one already. Let me see if I can show you and have it show. There are lots and lots and lots of skein or balls of yarn in here. This I am using for a shawl, but I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 balls of yarn. Now they are slightly smaller than your normal skein, maybe, but there are 9, and there is still so much room for this. Like, the top part isn't even full yet. So just upsize. Now, I will also say I did a bigger box because, and you can see the difference there, because it's a bigger bag. So I did exactly what I will show you later when I'm boxing it, is I just checked it, went, is that big enough, is that big enough, until I was happy, and then did it. I did end up using about 7 inches width for the binding of these. They ended up, let me tell you, they ended up 5 1/4 inches wide. So I had 7 inches, which gave me a decent amount of leftover hangover on each side, but you'll get to that later. This one, if you're interested in a smaller bag, I think it was 12 1/2 inches across and 9 inches down to get this bag. I also do sock sizes in 9x9, and that works really well. The reason I did this a little bit bigger was my interfacing was a little bit bigger and I wanted to use it all up. So my point of this little spiel here is you can do it any size you want. You can make it the size that I've given patterns instructions for here. You can make it bigger. The main thing to remember is that the front panel, the inside panels, and the interfacing inside the two are the same size. If you have those the same size, you're fine. I think that's enough rambling from me about sizes. But I just wanted to let you know, I'm not giving you specific written instructions for all the different sizes, but I have just mentioned them there. And if you want to make your own size, go ahead. It's really, really very simple. And let's get to sewing a sock project bag. If you're planning to do a piece front, do that now, but know the bottom 1 1/4 inches will be hidden. So your final piece will actually look something like that. That bottom bit will become part of the base of the bag. So if you are piecing something, just be aware of that. And I recommend maybe making a bag that is a bit more basic first so that you have an idea of how it lies. I've done many of these and I have definitely aimed to have, you know, fabric come up to here and then had the bag much bigger than I expected or much smaller than I expected. So I encourage you to follow along the process first so you have an idea of how it works out. But definitely if you are planning to jump in and do it, just know that bottom bit will be the bottom of the bag and then what you see will be the rest of the front. So to start with, take one of your front pieces and one of your back or your lining pieces and iron them together. Do that with both of them. The other thing we're going to do now is grab our strap and iron that. So to do that, you fold it in half. Then open it, fold it into the center and iron it down and do that on both sides. And then to finish it off, fold it in together, and I just like to iron that again flat to make sure that it all stays in place. All right, so I now have the interfacings ironed onto the front. Like I said, if you're sewing this, you may sew that instead of ironing. I have the handles sewn. I'll just show you again what I did there. So you have the piece, you fold it in half, iron, and then you fold the two ends into that middle line and iron, and then fold it over and iron again. And then you have a nice little strap that is just waiting to be sewn down. And to sew the strap, we're going to sew the sides that are open. We're going to sew down that side, and then I just sew across the bottom and sew back up the other side. And that's more for symmetry than anything else. It doesn't need to be sewn, but it makes it look symmetrical. So we're going to do that. I'm going to sew as close to the edge as possible. And I'm going to start with the side that opens up. So I'm going to put that under there. And start sewing. Now when I get to the end, I just turn it around, sew across. You won't see that part, so it doesn't matter. And then I do the same down the other side. And there you have it. Now when we put it in, it'll be folded in half and this end will be completely buried. So it doesn't matter if that's scrappy or fluffy, and that will become your handle. Okay, the next thing is adding the zip. So, like I said previously, this bag is 9 inches across and 10 inches down. So what I'm going to do is get my lining fabric face up. Put these two out of the way for this moment. Lining fabric face up. I'm going to put the zip on top of the lining fabric. Now, it does not have to be perfectly centered, anything like that. We will end up chopping the ends off. Just putting it there, making sure that the ends line up. Then I'm going to get my main fabric and put it upside down on top of the lining fabric. Now, this time I do want to make sure that it lines up with the lining fabric. And then I have these trusty little clips that I'm just going to clip on. You can use pins for this, absolutely. I find these Wonder clips very handy for doing things like zippers. And you can see I have my lining, my zip, and my main fabric all there facing together. Now, the main trick with this, which if you followed what I've said you will have done, put your lining down, you put your zip facing up, and then you put your main fabric. And once you've sewn it, that means the zip will be on the outside with your main fabric. If you put the zip facing down, you'll end up with the lining fabric on your outside. So you want to make sure you put your lining down, zip facing up, and then your main fabric on top, which is already got the interfacing on. Now, what we are going to do is we are just going to sew along this line. If you have a zip that only just reaches your fabric, then the zip will be somewhere in here, and that will inhibit the sewing because you'll get to a bump. So if you're going to do that, unzip the zip, sew halfway down, stop with the needle in if possible, stop, zip that up again, and keep going. The reason I like having zips that are a bit longer is that I don't have to worry about that. I can do all my sewing with the zip out of the way, and then later on bring that in so that we're not cutting it off when we cut off the excess. All right, so I'm going to go sew this down. Now, I know zips are the part that people get scared of a lot in sewing bags. They are nothing to be afraid of, but I have done a lot of them now. When I started, I absolutely was afraid of them and tried to make sure that I did this part incredibly slowly, making sure that everything was right. One thing that I will say is helpful is using a zipper foot. This is a foot for your machine that allows you to put the zip, I don't know if you'll be able to see this zip, there you go. There's a little notch here, so you can put the zip under that part and sew, and it will sew in this little notch. So it means that you can get quite a snug fit for the zip. Now for dresses and things where you want zips to be pretty invisible, I will absolutely do that. For bags, I'm not so fussed about having it be super snug because I don't want fabric to catch in the zip or anything like that. But I want it to be consistent. So if you have a zip foot, put that onto your machine now. And we can get started. Now, like I said, lining first, zip facing up, main fabric on top. Make sure that the right sides are facing with the zip in between. And what I do is I just take off that first one and make sure that those bits are lining up. And I tuck it under there. Flick that out of the way. Tuck it under, and I get ready to start sewing. Sew the length. Sew the length, and then you have a zip caught in with, again, that zip part sitting facing up next to the right side of the fabric. Now, something I didn't mention before that I will mention now, all seams in this bag are 1/4 inch. The only one that I do not always do 1/4 inch is this zip seam. That is actually a bit bigger than a 1/4 inch, but if you did a 1/4 inch, that would be fine as well. You would just end up with a slightly bigger gap here. So 1/4 inch is fine for the entire bag, but with zips, like I said, I just do it a bit differently because I just match it up with the edge of my zipper foot. Up to you, personal preference. Now, next part is what I'm going to do is I'm going to open that up. I'm going to make sure that this bit is facing that way. I'm going to open it up and I'm going to sew this down. This gives a cleaner finish at the end. It also means that you are less likely to have fabric getting caught in the zip. Some people will sew the lining fabric, flick it that way and sew that down too. You are welcome to do that. It definitely stops fabric getting caught in the zip, but I find that it makes turning the bag right side out. It doesn't sit quite as flat at the end. So I've decided not to do that for mine. I leave that stuck out and I will sew this and I'll show you what I do at the end so that the lining doesn't just fall out of the bag or anything like that. All right, let's sew this. And you can see that beautiful finished edge there. Now, if you'd sewn the back in, you would also have that same edge on the back. But like I said, I don't do that. You're welcome to if you want to. So there you go. That's the zip halfway installed. Well done. You can see the thread I'm using here is white. There's enough white in the red and the blue that I'm just going to use the white for the entire thing. If you want to change colours for thread for different elements of your bag, go ahead. I change thread as little as possible when I'm sewing, and so I try and find a thread colour that I'm happy to use for the entire bag. Or if I'm making multiple bags at once, I try and make sure they're in the same colour theme so that I can do still more than just one line before I change thread. Personal preference, it's up to you how you prefer to do that as well. All right, let's go get ready for the other side. Okay, so we've sewn this first side in. Now we need to sew the second side. And what we're going to do for that is lay our fabric out. If there's a right side up, put the right side up facing towards the top. But I have not done that. All right, so right side up, we're going to put this, line it up with the fabric. And so you can see here that the lining fabrics line up, and then get the top, put it down wrong side up, and we're going to go through and pin that down again. So, sorry, pin, clip, secure, whichever way. So just put one there. What I like to do with this one is just shift it around a little bit if I feel like it needs it. And put it down, clip. And I usually do one in the middle as well, because I find two things. One, with zips, the fabric shifts more than it would otherwise, but also I take this one off at the very beginning, so I like to have something else securing it before I get to the end. So again, if you open that up, you will now see that zip beautifully lining up between the two right side fabrics. That's what we want. If you see that, you're ready to sew. All right, we're going to do the same thing we just did. Line it up, whatever line you used for the first one, use the same line. I line it up with the edge of my zipper foot, like I said. Now, if you see this, there's a little bit of blue peeking out underneath. I'm just going to pull from the bottom to line that up. It doesn't have to be perfect. I will say that. I've made many of these bags. It does not have to line up perfectly. The sewing has a multitude of slight errors. And then at the end, get it lining up as best you can, but again, doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just using my machine to do this. I have a Juki. I quite like my Juki, it's a DX7, but that is a new machine for me. I was doing this on a $200 Brother machine before I got my new machine. So you don't have to have a fancy machine with auto cut or anything like that to make these bags. Move those out of the way. And again, I'm just going to open it up, make sure that this is facing that way, and then open, push that over, and I'm going to go down here again. Now you should have on the other side 1, 2, 3. So you should have the main fabric and both linings on this side, and on this side will just be the main fabric and the little taggy bit. Okay, let's sew. And now you should have something that looks like this with the two lines on either side and a zip that unzips. And if you look inside, you should have some lining fabric. Now clearly it's not finished, but you should have a functioning zip. Congratulations. Like I said, zips are usually the part that people worry about the most. If you've made it this far, you've done the hardest part. Believe it or not, this is almost finished. Look at that. Bag is getting there. So now what you need to do is open it out, and you want to join the front sides together and the linings together. Now, a very important point before you sew this is you need to unzip the zip. Not entirely, but enough that you can turn the bag inside out through that hole. Okay? Make sure you do that. Otherwise, when you're finished, your zip will either be done up so you can't get it undone easily, or if you forget and you're doing a zip that's bigger and it's down here, it'll be completely outside of the bag. So you want to unzip the zip most of the way before you do this step. Now, fold that back up. The other thing that I will show you now is you also want to put your strap in. Now, I like my strap to be on the end that the zip will zip up to, and I like it to be on an angle. It means I can knit on the go, having a handle up this end, so I can undo the zip a bit, the yarn can come out, and I can knit while I'm walking. So what I do when I'm putting my strap in is I line up the ends and I put it down near the top on an angle going up. Now I do this because it means that I will have, when it's finished, a strap coming out like that, which is exactly what I want. If you want it to be flat and come out straight, you can do that as well, but from experience, I much prefer it on an angle. And if you want a bigger strap, you just make that longer to start with. If you do this bag, you finish it and you go, actually, I wish it was longer, you can cut that 15, 16, 17 inches. I just prefer a shorter one. And then I just tuck that up underneath the lining so that it won't get caught, and I bring this one back down. And this is ready to pin or clip and then sew. I'm just going to move that clip so it's got all 3 layers here. Now, for this part here, I will eventually trim these off. I don't want to do that until after I've sewn, just in case I do something wrong. So I just want to line up those there, and I will clip that. It gets its own little clip. And on this side, I will line up the edges, and that'll get its own little clip. Now, very simply, extra zip, extra handle, Now I'm just going to line up everything else and just a couple of clips. You can put as many or as few as you want to make it comfortable for you. I don't do many. The only thing is if I have lines on the front that I want to match up, I will try and pin or clip those specific lines. But for a floral fabric, I'm not going to try and match anything. And so that's it. Now, all you need to do is sew around the outside, but you want to leave a gap here for turning inside out. So I will usually sew maybe 2 inches from the end around the whole outside and come back and sew 2 inches in. Yeah, so you want to leave a gap for turning. I will usually leave about a 4-inch gap. If you want a reminder, you can actually put pins or clips here for where to start and where to stop. And so you can start here, sew around the whole outside, and then come back here and stop here, and that's just a little reminder. I don't do that anymore, but I definitely did at the beginning because I kept forgetting. The other thing is when I sew over the handle, I will go back and forth over that a couple of times just to make sure that that's secure, because that will get a lot of weight. If you haven't already, go back, change your zipper foot out back to your normal everyday foot, and this will be a 1/4 inch seam. I also like to reinforce the beginning and the end. Just by reverse stitching a little bit, and that helps me make sure that when I turn it inside out, it's not going to undo my stitching. Now you can see here it's not lining up the top and bottom very well. That doesn't matter. Just make sure that you have caught all the fabric. When you get to the zip, it will be thick. Make sure that you take it slowly, and if you are doing a shorter zip and you potentially will sew over this, be extra careful that you do not sew over the middle. I'm also using a nylon teeth zipper. If you're using a metal teeth zipper, you also want to be very careful while sewing over the zip. You can see that it is sewn the whole way around the outside. I did the back stitching over the handle, and on this side in the lining there is a little hole. Before I turn it inside out, I'm going to get a pair of scissors and chop these little end bits off. Now, just double check that you don't have a zipper end there. The zipper end should be inside your bag. And then I'm just going to cut off this little tail as well. That just removes some of the bulk from the inside of the bag. Now, you get this opening and you turn the bag inside. Well, actually, you turn the bag inside out by pulling the lining down. So at the moment I'm just pulling the lining over the top. You can pull the whole bag through, but we actually need it to be like this for the next part. So I'm just going to grab the inside and pull it out a little bit so I have room to move here. Now for this part, we're going to sew the ends, sew this hole shut. Now you can do this by hand with a ladder stitch or an invisible stitch if you want to. I do not look at the inside of my bag enough to care, and so I always just sew it down with the machine. So basically just push the seam in there. You can iron that if you want to. I just find pressing it usually gives it enough of a seam. And you can see in there you've got a bit of a hem on both sides. I'm now just going to clip that again. If you want to pin it, you can pin it. And I'm going to take this over to the machine and sew that closed. Now you can see my opening starts here. The rest of that is already sewn down. So I'm going to start just on the other side of where that opening is. I'm just going to sew as close to the edge as I can while still making sure I get both pieces of fabric. Again, just a little reverse at the beginning. And then just have a look and see, and my end is all the way down here. So I'm now just going to put my finger there. You can absolutely use a pin or something if you want to. So a little bit further and reverse, just to tack it down. And there you go. If you have to trim thread, trim thread. Done. And there we have it. So I'll show you over here again. This edge is now sewn in. I can't pull that apart. And now the bag is enclosed. Now, instead of pulling this the right way out, before we do that, we are going to do a binding. So at this point, I just like to unzip that zip the rest of the way. And now we're going to push this all the way back inside. So it's not going to be very easy to see, but what I'm doing is I'm taking the very corner of the outside of the bag and pushing it in to the very corner of the inside. So that is now both the lining and the main fabric in this corner. I'm going to do the same with the other corner. You can absolutely use a knitting needle or a pointer or something at this point, but because the main fabric is still lying flat and rectangle with pointed corners from when we sewed it. So it actually doesn't need help to go into that pointy shape. It just needs help to be pushed into the corners. So once you've got them in the corners, what I want you to do is box it out. So if it's lying flat, it looks like that. Put your hand into the side and we're actually going to push it flat so that the seam on the bottom and the seam on the side meet up. You can also feel inside, the inside seam for the front and the back. You can try and get them to line up as well. That is what you will see on the outside. Now, I don't normally worry about this, but I'll just show you for perfectionists. So that's how it was sitting before. I can move that over just a little bit and that seam is now lining up. So once you've done that, and that's all boxed out in the corners, I'm just going to clip that again. And again, you can absolutely use pins, not clips. And I'm going to do that for the other side as well. So get my finger all the way in the corner, get that looking somewhat straight. Again, if you want to box it out, you can, and the seams do not line up. So I'm just going to shift that until they line up. Beautiful. And then make sure that's feeling somewhat flat and clip the corners. Now, until this point, you have a perfectly functional flat bag. What this will do is box out the corners so that it will stand up, have a bit more width. So you can do this at any width. I am going to do two by two. I line it up as much as I can with the grid. And then I'm going to move these in, pick up my ruler and place it on the bag on a diagonal from this corner to this corner. So it's a 2-inch on either side. And then it's not perfect. It doesn't have to be. You just want both bags to be about the same. So then, rotary cutter, and cut that off. Now, you are cutting through, look at all those different layers in there. So it'll be a little bit to get through it, but you can do it. Then I get my little piece of fabric. Now, if you're doing it bigger and you've cut this bigger, now would be the time to cut it down to size. And this is how you do it. Fold this in half. And try not to move it or shift it, but just lie that centered on one side and clip that back on. Now, that's what you should have on one side, on the other. When we sew this, we are going to sew it 1/4 inch down again, which means that this is actually how much leftover we will have. In this case, it's about 1/2 inch. Now, you can have a little bit less, you can have a little bit more. You don't want to have too much less. You can have a little bit more. So if you're doing it upsizing, and what I mean by that is, for this other one, I won't do it, but I will demonstrate. We just did it. So you want to do this for both corners. We just did this cutting 2 across, 2 down. If you wanted to do 2.5 across, 2.5 down, 3 across, 3 down, you can. For every bit that you take off here, you will take off some of your height. So you can see this line here is the height of the bag. And so for every bit that you're taking off here, you are making the bag shorter and shorter and shorter. But you are also making the bottom wider and wider and wider. So that's the payoff here. And that's why if you want to do a different size bag, you can. You've just got to think about bottom as part of that, not just looking at I want it higher or wider, but actually how big do you want the base. So what I will sometimes do is I'll just make a big bag or kind of estimate how big I want it. And then I get to this stage, and rather than just saying I'm going to do a 2-inch one, is I'll do this. So I'll look at this and say, do I want the bag that high, or do I want it that size? And so you can have a bit of a look and a play and a look inside and say, how big is this bag going to be? Do you want it really wide and not very high? You know, there are options. The more you take off, the less I would recommend this form of doing it, because if you're taking off that much, that's actually quite a bit of fabric that you're losing. There are other ways you can do it to avoid wasting the fabric, but for this way, you know, 2, 3, 4 inches, I don't really mind for the ease of having it done this way. So like I said before, I'm going to do this 2 by 2 because that's what I did previously. Now we're going to do the same thing here. Is we're going to put this on this side and add the clips back on. And so you can see I have both here clipped on, and now we can sew them. It is good to make sure they can both be at the bottom or they can both be at the side. For symmetry, it's nice to have them on the same part of the bag. I have done some where I put one on the side and one on the bottom. It doesn't really make a difference, it's inside the bag, but for symmetry I like to do it the same. Now what we're going to do is sew 1/4 inch down here. No need to reinforce, this whole seam will be hidden. And now same on the other side. So now this will become the binding, but we want to hide the ends. So we're going to just fold that up a little bit, fold it over, and then bring this down on top and pin that in place. Now I'll show you that again on the other side. Fold this over, bring that across onto where you've already sewn, and then fold the top down. Make sure that the edge is tucked in there. Fold the top down on top and pin that in place, or clip it. Now, because I take this one off to sew, I also like to just put one in the center so that it does not shift as I'm sewing. So take the top one off and sew that down. This one I do reinforce. And then sew. And there you have it, enclosed on both sides. And you can see on this side the thread goes underneath, and on this side the sewing line is on top. And that's why I said I like to have the symmetry. It doesn't matter, it's inside the bag, but I do like it to be on the same part. So for this side, we're going to do the same thing. And that is it. All right, all the sewing is done. Now you just turn it in the right way. And the corners should box out very easily. I like to just push this zip part out a little bit. And there you have it. Boxed bottom. Thank you so much for sewing along with me today. I had a lot of fun and I hope you did too. Remember, there are a lot of ways you can modify this bag to do the different colours and the different sizes like I spoke about before. So have a lot of fun giving it a try. Save this video so you can come back and watch this tutorial later. And if you've learnt something or you've appreciated it, like and subscribe, and check out my regular podcast. Happy sewing!